North Dakota. This is a Scribe's Journey with your host, Richard Polinelli.
Picked a great guest for our first show. In fact, when I was going down the list of people I wanted to put in that top slot, her name just jumped up right on the right at the top. So yeah, it should. I read a book of hers for the Writer's Block, which I co-host now, and it was an amazing book. And I don't normally leave reviews for books that I've read on Writer's Block. In fact, I think it's happened 3 times. Hers was one. It was that good. So we're going to talk to her about that book a little bit, and she's got a new book coming out. So let's introduce our guest. Jennifer Ann Gordon is a Gothic horror literary fiction novelist. Her work includes Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, which was an amazing book, which also won the Kindle Award for Best Horror Suspense for 2020, which it should. It won Best Horror 2020 from Authors on the Air and was a finalist for American Book Fest Best Book Award. Say that 3 times fast. Horror 2020. It also received the Platinum 5-star review from Reader's Choice. That is an amazing thing to get, as well as the Gold Seal from BookView. Her second novel, From Daylight to Madness, received the Gold Seal from BookView as well, and the Platinum Seal from Reader's Favorite. And that's another outfit where you get something like that from them. That's a good thing. So her third novel, When the Sleeping Dead Still Talk, was published late last year. She has a new novel coming out in about a week or two from when this is going to be broadcast. It'll be released on July 13th, and it's pretty ugly. She is, and that's the title. That's not a description of the book. She is a member, there it is. She is a member of the Horror Writers Association, where she sits on one of the juries for the Bram Stoker Awards. She's also a member of New England Horror Writers and sits on the committee for the New England Crime Bake Festival. Welcome to the podcast, Jennifer.
Hey, Richard, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. I'm going to get rid of those reading glasses because, as I mentioned,
we don't want to look blind.
No. I'm feeling old enough as it is that I go grab reading glasses now. I mentioned earlier, you were on the Writer's Block with Jim, Christina, and I think about a month and a half ago.
Yes,
something
about
like that.
that.
And I read that book, and it was amazing to me how you develop the characters. I mean, these are broken people, and somehow they come together, and it unfolds in this amazing story. And the ending, which we will not give away, is literally open to interpretation.
Yes.
It could be however you, the reader, wants it to end is how it's going to end. And I just thought it was an amazingly well done book, and that's the primary reason why you're the first person on our new podcast. I just got into Pretty Ugly. Life got in the way. I didn't get to finish it, but it seems like you're on the same track with that book. You deal with broken people, and somehow they come together and make sense of the world they're in. Is that something you set out to do?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I find, and I don't know if this is just because maybe I went to school for theater and I was a theater major, and all of the characters I liked to portray in school and then later when I was acting professionally were the very broken characters, because I found that they were the most interesting. And I also really liked playing villains and seeing the humanity in somebody who might not be necessarily a really great person. So I think that's my sweet spot of where I like to write people. And was definitely the case in Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as my hotel series. Pretty Ugly follows, as you know, because you just started it, a similar path of 2 broken people. In this case, in Pretty Ugly, it is a woman named Amelia. She's an Instagram influencer. And you find out very early on that she had a very troubled childhood. Her father killed himself when she was a young girl. Her mother wasn't in the picture. So she basically became a different person in order to cope with her own grief. And she became Amelia. And she fills her entire life with Instagram likes and attention from people that don't know her. So she's kind of a fictitious version of herself. My other main character is a man named Sam. He is running for governor of the state of Massachusetts. He is the adult son of the vice president of the United States. He may or may not have a drug abuse problem. He definitely doesn't want to be a politician, but is somehow, due to family obligations, has found himself in this position where they're dubbing him the new JFK.
Mm-hmm.
Again, very early on in the book, so it's not too much of a spoiler, but he gets involved in a low-level political scandal. And this is all happening right as a virus, a world-ending virus, is taking over the world. So sorry, everybody, that I wrote a book about a virus during a pandemic. The idea came about before COVID, and then it was just like, then when COVID hit, I just kept going, I can't write this book about a virus, but it's the book I want to write.
Yeah.
So, but it's not about our virus. It's about a more disgusting virus.
Yeah, there you go. The one we're dealing with now doesn't seem to be world ending. At least we've got that to look forward to. We're going to survive this one. It's funny. You mentioned you didn't set out to write a virus story in the middle of a pandemic, but a lot of especially in science fiction and in other areas, a lot of people are writing fiction, and within a year or two, what they wrote is starting to happen in real life. It's kind of spooky when that happens, isn't it?
It is really spooky. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic last year, I read Paul Tremblay's novel Survivor Song, and that was about a pandemic, and he wrote it the year before our pandemic, and the things that he got correct were incredible and terrifying at the same time. And I had him on my show, and I was just like, do you feel like you saw the future?
Yeah. A guest that's coming up in a couple of weeks, Stephanie Osborne, she was on the old podcast, and we were talking about a book she wrote. She works for NASA, so she wrote this disaster story centered around a shuttle accident, and then Columbia happens almost exactly like she wrote it. And it was just like, I've got a similar story in one of mine, and you look at how things are playing out, and how you wrote it, and you're like, okay, did I tap into something, or is it just happenstance? What is it? It's odd when you see fiction come true like that.
Yeah. So when I was writing Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent a few years ago, my main character in that novel gets in a car accident, but he has a very specific injury. He breaks his leg and he shatters his hip. So I was about halfway done that book, and my mom, who lives with us, fell, and she had the exact same injury as him, like the exact part of the leg broke, the hip shattered the same way. And I was like, her surgery was the same surgery he had. And I was like, did I manifest that? Like, be careful what you write.
I Tosca did one. It's a virus story.
I love the line between.
Yeah, the line between. We were talking about that, and then it was like 2 months after she was on my show, and then our pandemic hit. And so I sent her a quick message and said, you are no longer allowed to write pandemic stories because you make them happen somehow. And she kind of like, it's spooky. But I don't know that there's an actual connection, but I just think that as fiction writers, we are tasked to come up with these stories that may be a little bit larger than life, maybe you wouldn't expect. And yet it's if we can think it's possible that it could happen. So
and that's truly the beauty of fiction too, is taking those things that can very much happen and making them bigger. But especially like when horror, sci-fi, anything, it needs to have that kernel of absolute truth to it. Or else it's not frightening. It's like,
that's true.
And we all know now that there's like nothing scarier than a pandemic. Like being too scared to go to the grocery store. And, the early days of the pandemic when we were all washing our mail and, when we were like wiping down containers of Lysol wipes with Lysol wipes, like it was just.
Yeah. I remember early on when we didn't really know that much about what was causing it. I mean, you couldn't find cleaning supplies in the grocery store to save your
Yeah.
life. I went to the store one day, and we were still in Omaha, and this guy came out of the store. His cart was loaded with Clorox wipes and toilet paper. It was
Yeah.
just, people were going nuts because you just didn't know. And I think with a story like yours, people are going to draw on some of the memories they've had of this last year or so, and
Yeah,
it'll help connect that story for
it
them.
does. And I will say, it is a book about a virus, but so it's very much a book about like the early days of a virus when nobody knows honestly what the heck is happening. And then there is a time jump. So it's like, and then we're almost like on the other end of it. But the way my virus works, it works a lot like the herpes virus. So it'll
Mhm.
flare up and then go away,
Yeah.
and then it comes back. So
Okay, well, let's hope that one doesn't come true, because we
yeah,
we don't need those.
I know. I know. I was like writing
We
it going, maybe I should give it a happier ending.
Now, one thing you tend to do, and I have not read the hotel series, so I don't know. I may be off track here, but you tend to start with broken people as your characters. Um, is it a case of a person who's broken or has those flaws? Are they more interesting to write? Do you think is that why you're drawn to that?
I am drawn to that because I always have been drawn to that kind of person, even like in what I'm reading. And I always like, I'll quote, I think it's Dostoevsky, where every fat family is happy in the same way, but every family's unhappy in a different way, or something like that. So
Mhm.
I think heartbreak is such an interesting thing to try to explore with a character, like the moment in their life where things changed, like those
Mhm.
defining, we all have those like little pockets in our memory of happy and sad and angry and awful moments. But if you think about like the defining moments of your life that made you who you are, I guess that's where I start with my characters. Like,
Yeah.
what was the moment where they went from like happy childhood to, oh, this is what the world is?
Mhm.
And sometimes that happens at a very young age, sometimes it happens later. And I just am drawn to like the way people cope with trauma,
Yeah.
and figuring out how to heal from that too, because I think there's also an aspect of like healing in my books of none of my characters want to be broken. they
Right.
they want to be better, but they just don't know how to do that. And then I throw them into terrible circumstances like a haunted island or an apocalypse or a Victorian mental institution, and say
Mhm.
like, now figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's an approach I think I know I take, is that I want a normal, ordinary person thrown into an extraordinary situation, and then let's see what they do with it. Let's see
Yeah.
how they get their way through it, and make things better than they were before they arrived. To me, that's the best way to develop a character. You don't want the perfect character who always is right and always has things going perfectly, and that's boring. Um, for me, I always tend to have the happy ending at the end. And even with yours, even though the one I read, I mean, it has a happy ending.
It can be
It
considered a happy
it
ending,
can be
yes.
considered happy. It has a
And I
positive ending.
yeah, all every book I've written, I'm a sucker for like an ambiguous end where people are like, oh, I kind of want a little bit more.
Mhm.
And all of them can be seen in two different ways or multiple different ways
Yeah.
of like, oh, that's either a really sad ending, or oh, that is a happy ending. Like my
Yeah.
hotel series, at the end of that second book, I was very surprised with how many people wrote to me and said, I love that you gave them a happy ending. And then there were so many other people that wrote to me and said, I can't believe you didn't give them a happy ending.
There you go.
And I was like, it's the same ending. So I
Mhm.
think,
Well, that was what I was with Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, was it could be interpreted in many ways. And when we got done on the writer's block, you, Jim, and I had a discussion, because I was curious, were you going to do a sequel? And then we had some theories on what exactly had happened. And we all had 3 different ideas. And you obviously, you created it, so you know what you wanted. Jim was off on this track, and I'm over here with this track. So I would assume with other people who've read it, they've come up with different endings as well. And that's what makes that book to me so good, is that you can read it and have 10 people reading it, and you'll get 10 different responses on how that thing ended.
It's true. I did a book club, and it was 6 women, and they all read it, and they all said, because they wanted to talk about the end. I'm like, okay. And they all had a different opinion.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh. And hopefully we'll get her back. And I think we are back. I hope we're back.
Oh, we're back.
We're back. It wouldn't be a first show without technical difficulties,
I mean, honestly, Richard, the first time I hosted Writers Showcase, my internet went out like so many times, and I was live, and my poor guest just like, and it was also Paul Tremblay, who we talked about before, just sat there like, oh, she's gone. Okay. I imagine she would ask me this question, and he just vamped, and then I would pop back on, and like we talked for like 2 minutes, and then I was gone again. And I'm like, this is a living nightmare. I have one of my favorite authors on the show. The first time I'm hosting Writer's Showcase, it's live. Like everything that could go wrong was going wrong.
Yep. We had back when we were a Scribe's Journey, we had a couple of times where the weather was killing us as far as people on their end. And, they'd be talking, all of a sudden you get that, and you're like, oh, well, okay, let's wait for a minute, see if she comes back. And 2 minutes later, they'd be back on. So yeah, this is the first time I've been zapped off, but that's,
I just assumed it was my fault. I'm like, oh no, it's happening again. And then I'm like, wait a minute, my internet's fine.
Yeah. No, I waited a second, then it dawned on me. I went over and tried to go to another website, and nothing happened. I'm like, oh, okay, this time is my fault. Yay. So before we got zapped, I was about to actually wrap up the show because we're almost at the end. Tell the viewers where they can find you online, and then we'll remind them when and where you can find your next book.
The easiest place to find me online is actually on my website, which is www.jenniferannegordon.com. And that's Anne with an E, like Anne of Green Gables. That has the links to all of my social media. I'm very active on Facebook and a little bit on Instagram, but very rarely on Twitter. I'm not a tweeter. I know people swear by it, but every time I go there, I have like an instant panic attack.
Yeah.
So
when it first started, it was nice as an author to have that platform, but it's kind of degenerated into a sewer, to be honest. And I'm getting to where I don't really do much on it anymore.
I know there are certain places where it's just like, oh, that's a lot of toxic stuff going on. But then sometimes I go on and I see like really funny things from people I really adore. And I'm like, maybe I should spend more time on here. But then 2 seconds later, I just see like hate speech. So I'm like, oh, no, I'd rather go to Instagram and just like look at pictures of people's pets.
There you go. Yeah, so, that's much more fun.
I know.
Okay, so again, your latest book is coming out on July 13th. The title is Pretty Ugly. The book is not pretty ugly, I can assure you. And I expect that we will have you on again in the future talking about your next book after this one.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for putting up with our technical difficulties, and a problem. We hope that this new book comes out and it just sells like gangbusters, and then we can say we knew you back when.
Oh, you're too nice.
Well, we try to be. We try to be. So.
This has been a Scribe's Journey with your host, Richard Palinelli. Tuscany Bay production.